Welcome to Cars on Call. I am gastroenterologist and automotive journalist, Steve Schutz. Stefan. I jumped the
No,
gun.
that would be me, dude.
Identities.
Not you.
Who are
Everybody
you?
wants to. Everybody wants to be you, Stefan.
Everybody wants to be a GI guys. All wanted to be surgeons. Come on, admit it, man. You didn't want to be.
I heard
You
someone say.
imposter.
Somebody said gastroenterologists are wannabe surgeons with too short of an attention span, and I think that's true.
We're just glad that there may be something else shorter as well. You know, reach down and find a
Whoa.
Sorry.
How did we get all the way there?
Are we still in the opener?
we're still saying hi.
Hi.
Stefan is obviously here, and Adam Hudson, automotive collector, connoisseur, historian, and he's not in the Highlands anymore. Highlands, North Carolina.
Although I would like to be, because it's still quite cool there, but it's always good to be home. Always good to be home. I saw some fun things. That's the car spotting topic today.
Yeah. So in addition to car spotting, which I'm really psyched to talk about because your car spotting was cool, which you generally have cool car spotting apps. Anyway, Stefan, of course, has trauma surgeon safety, and we're going to talk Chrysler 300, and then we're going to finish up with something we are like
Can't wait.
psyched.
Just can't wait.
So psyched to talk about. It is really the swan song of the hot hatch, but the hot hatch has had a hell of a history, and it's a Diana Ross thing. And one of her songs, she said, "We won't have tomorrow, but we had yesterday." Well, the hot hatch had a hell of a yesterday, and even today is pretty good. It's not going to have a tomorrow, but it had a hell of a yesterday. So Chrysler 300, we were talking about this, this kind of bothered me because we have all been talking about it, and I blame myself just as much as anybody. We're talking Charger and Challenger are dying, the Hellcat, Charger, Challenger, and we overlooked the 300, the Chrysler 300C. And it's the same
Apparently
platform.
many did.
No, it sold great, at least for a while. And it's a car that needs a little bit of love.
The Fentley, man. I just remember this car as the Fentley, the faux Fentley. Yeah.
Yes. And this
car, fake Bentley.
This car is on the same platform as the Charger and Challenger. It came out at the same time. So it's been out. Hello, 2005. It was introduced. And it's gonna die at the same time as the Charger Challenger, which is December of this year. It's gonna die. It has had a hell of a run. It was conceived and introduced during the ill-fated Daimler Chrysler era. It was based on a mid-90s E-Class, largely, and it became, just like the Escalade, out of nowhere, became a hip-hop sensation. Snoop Dogg famously owned one. There's a picture of Snoop Dogg with his dub Chrysler 300C. It appeared in countless rap videos. And my son, Peter, my youngest son, he played a video game when he was like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. He played this video game all the time. And it was basically you drove around, you raced around LA and you chased other cars. It was like a precursor to Grand Theft Auto. And he could have picked a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or Porsche or all kinds of sports cars. He always chose the 300C. And I asked him why. He said, because it's the coolest car. And I'm like, no, it's not. But this car went from a Bentley knockoff to a rapper pop culture phenomenon. And now it's going away. Stefan, talk about the Bentley thing, because I think it is a knockoff.
It was kind of like, the Ford Explorer being a knockoff of the Range Rover in their design, but Chrysler came out with this 300. It was a knockoff on the Bentley. People actually were changing out the grills, putting on Bentley grills. But, always have to give credit to Chrysler and Dodge. I mean, they just make some cars that have just kind of, an attitude. And this is their nice version of attitude versus the Charger and the Challenger. And, it's like we had a podcast while we talked about cars we like, we'd never be seen in. I mean, I love these cars, but there's no way in hell you'd see one in my driveway. But I do honestly, they just have attitude. They got stance, they got style. They're a little bit nasty. They've got some culture attached to them. I've liked the Chrysler 200E. It's just like, they'll never be one of my driveway, but I really do like them. I like what people do to them. They change out the taillights. They put different wheels on them, little things. But it's, how many four-door cars in America do you see people personalizing that have this much attitude? This is it.
Well, it is it. And I remember vividly when this car came out under the headline, I forget what magazine or what website was talking about it, but it said Chrysler 300, the return of the great American sedan. And danged if they weren't right.
Absolutely.
A friend of mine had one like shortly after they came out. He had a black one and the interior was sort of a grayish tan somewhere.
He had a nasty one.
Yeah, and it was leather. He had the small Hemi V8. That car would fly. It also, as I remember, had tortoise shell accents, faux tortoise shell, like you would do sunglasses or whatever, accents inside, which were standard, or at least OEM. And the car was handsome. It was well appointed. It rode good. And being built on the Chrysler, on the
300E platform, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't even put it together when it was called the Chrysler 300 because there had been a Chrysler 300 back in the annals of the Chrysler history, and to call it a 300 kind of as a nod to the 300E, that's a very sophisticated platform. It did everything right, barely ever misplaced a foot. It was not a tail-happy, tail-wagging, big fat American sedan like people are used to. I really liked that car and its offshoot, the Magnum. I just thought that would.
Oh yeah, we talked about the dark horse, the Magnum being a dark horse. So listeners, the Magnum is the station wagon version of this. And you talk about a car with attitude. They put the Hemi in it, just a badass. And I mean, Chrysler and Dodge they will just throw something out in the market that's just badass. That like, it's a little bit skank, it's a little bit dirty, a little bit nasty, but man, I love it. Never one in my driveway, but I love these cars. I really do. Every time I see one, I'm like, yeah, dude, that's cool.
I spotted this is I don't know, 6 months ago, I spotted a Magnum where someone had put on a front clip from a 300C and they turned it into a 300C. Little did I know, and I found this out when I was looking up the 300C for today. Little did I know, they actually sold a 300 touring edition in rest of world. So Europe and South America, that kind of thing. You can actually buy a 300 wagon that was from the factory. So the dude I saw who swapped out the front end. But Adams, when you said it's an American car, what that really means is front engine, V8, rear wheel drive.
Yep. 4 doors, and not a 2+2. Honest to goodness, a real front and a real back seat, and an honest to goodness trunk you can get 2 or 3 friends in. And it was just that style, and I thought it had enough Euro intrigue to not look like the big fat overweight American what we had considered sort of the American last versions of the big sedan. I just thought this was kind of taut, and it had, of course, a lot of Euro influence to it, and it just seems to be at that time a very stylish entry into sort of a dead category.
Exactly. You got your choice between a Ford Taurus, a Chevy Malibu, or a 300E. Which one you taking?
100% the 300E.
300E all day long with the biggest ass engine I can get all day long.
I would shoot bullets in the other two before I would take them.
It's a 300C, but anyway.
Yeah, 300C, right. And 300 Chrysler instead of 300E Mercedes, exactly.
I got to ask the rhetorical question, and we do not need to dwell on it because we've got other things to move toward. If this is going away, and the Charger and the Challenger, what the heck is left? A Durango and a Hornet? I mean, what do we have there?
Very good question. You're right. What does Chrysler, Daimler, no, just Chrysler, Dodge have left when they get rid of these iconic vehicles in these kind of niche market that they have?
The only Chrysler that'll be left after the 300C goes away is the Pacifica minivan. But we're promised electric cars. Now, For the record, and this just came up in automotive news, so I found this very interesting. They have promised, Stellantis, your favorite car name, Stefan, but Stellantis has promised that the Charger and Challenger, at least the Charger, is going to come back. It's going to be BEV. Automotive News said last week, maybe not just BEV, maybe internal combustion is going to be in that new Charger.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I think with the trend we've had in BEVs and they've lost their halo and their angelic glow, that yeah, it's going to be, I mean, bring back it in a hybrid version. Okay.
Yep.
Imagine taking kind of the classic American V8 up front, wheel drive, then put an electric motor on the front end of that thing. I mean, I know it'd be a packaging nightmare, but to me, that's kind of more the American spirit. And then you throw a little battery somewhere in the pack, so you get 25 miles to be 25 miles on your battery. But you add the extra couple hundred horsepower to the front end of one of those things. I think that's a package that Americans would be like, yeah, I'll take that.
I don't disagree. And maybe if you wanted to assimilate some decent weight distribution, put the motors on the back and or the battery somewhere under the rear seat, and get some weight down low and make it a decent handler. And Lord, I actually, Steph, I don't think you're far off the mark there, because I mean
V6 transverse up front with two motors in the rear. That's kind of like a down step, but still, I think it's something Americans would. I think it's still something that's fairly exciting. But
I'd vote for. I love that idea, and I'd vote for a tweaked 300C. So update the styling a little bit.
Yep.
Hellcat. And then a plug-in hybrid. A plug-in hybrid. I'd like it to go 1.3 miles on a charge on just all electric power, but otherwise it should just be a damn Hellcat.
Yeah, 1.3 miles. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So it's got one extra 12-volt battery in it. Yeah, just one extra battery. Yeah, to give you 1.3 miles.
I think that a couple of double A's would probably.
Yeah, that's my vote.
Yeah, I like that.
Boom, right. we just solved that problem. Chrysler, I hope you're listening.
I hope you're listening. All right, car spotting Adams.
Let's see. As mentioned previously in the prelude buildup, I saw actually this car, which was on Bring a Trailer. You can see up there it sold for $65,000 on the 5th of August. This particular car was purchased by a gentleman who has a house in Highlands and elsewhere. I actually don't know where he's from, but I was at a Cars and Coffee on Saturday morning, and up roars this vehicle, thankfully with the lipstick having been removed. Apparently he used a makeup remover and got that mascara off, and it was out there, and that's the car. Exactly. That's a later version of the V8 that we've sort of grown to know and love. That's the V8 SGT, and that would be the last of that particular body style with the 4.7 V8. They bumped horsepower up to, I think, 430. Somebody's going to look me up and find I'm right or wrong on that. But there's that the only reason I included that 4.7, the earliest generation, when it came out in like 06-ish, I believe, was a 4.3 V8, and that lasted till 09, and it was a 380 horse motor. By that time, the competition had kind of eclipsed it. Then they came out with 4.7, which was a 420 horse, and in the GT we just saw with the lipstick, that's a 430 horse. Look how far back that motor sits in that car. I mean, it's basically in the front seat.
It's a front mid-engine. Yep.
Yeah. The back two plugs are in the front seat there with you. Yes. And I included the window sticker only, well, you can't really read it, but folks, it's somewhere in the 130, 140 range. And, whenever you see a car reselling, that particular one had like 20-something thousand miles, but just pick any of the GTs, they're at a third or a fourth of their original sticker. That, boys and girls, is a buy in my book. What do you think?
It's about, what cracks me up about these Aston Martins is I own a Bullet Mustang, which to me is kind of like the Ford version of an Aston Martin, is toned down. But when you see these Aston Martins and you start looking at English Cars and Coffees, they love to put, like this car, Adams, you mentioned lipstick. in England, you will see these Aston Martins with so many different color specks of lipstick on the mirrors, on the A pillar going to the back, the front. I'm like, wait a minute, these are the conservative English that supposedly have taste, and they're tarting up their cars. I mean, it's just like I look at this, I'm like, what the hell is this? But they love to do that to these Aston Martins, which to me is just crazy. But yeah, so listeners, just go look up like Aston Martin Cars and Coffee England. You're going to see these cars with color combinations and wheels like you're thinking just trash cars and coffee. But
well, it's to use the phrase you mentioned on the 300, those are the Astons with the skank package.
Oh,
absolutely. And they do like that in England. Yes, the UK likes to skank them up.
My take on this
just
car
offended our 2 English listeners. Okay.
Yeah, my take on this car when it launched, I remember thinking, well, they're obviously they're dipping down price wise to try to compete with the 911. So they wanted it to be to a price. And my recollection, Adams, you may know better than me. My recollection is this was based on the engine was based on a Duratec Ford V6 that they made 8 cylinders. They added 2 cylinders to it, but this is during the Ford ownership era. And one thing I didn't like about it, I never actually, no, I did. I drove one. The interior was just okay. You could tell they built it to a price. So the combination of a Ford-based engine, which was kind of a downer, and a not great interior, those were 2 negatives.
I don't disagree. The early cars had so many buttons. I think they had glanced inside a BMW and said, we can do that. And there were so many buttons in a row that would do everything from fan speed to vent output to anything with the HVAC, anything with the seat controls were all crammed in the middle. And then in 2010, they sort of got the message and changed it. That's when the 4.7 started getting in there. And they cleaned it up a little bit. I'm not sure what version you drove. And then that Duratec V6, talk about adaptability. Not only did they graft 2 cylinders on to make that V8, which is not a bad motor at all. And Lord, does it sound glorious. This thing sounded fantastic when it rumbled through. But then they Siamese 2 of the V6s together to make the V12, which you could get in a GT as well, in a Vantage.
The other thing about these cars were they're gorgeous looking on the outside. They sound great. It's kind of like waking up in the morning and she washes the makeup off and you see what's really underneath all of it. And it's kind of because if you look at the switch gear inside of these cars was just trash switch gear from like a Ford Fiesta. So you've got this gorgeous car on the outside, a fabulous motor, fabulous sound, but you're starting to touch the switch gear on the inside. Like, wait a minute, my Fiesta has this. Wait a minute, this came out of the Ford Mondeo. And so now they're not doing that. But in this era of cost savings, they're doing these cars. So it's kind of like it's a give or take. But yeah, it's like, oh, put your makeup back on, baby.
Yeah, it's right. It's if you dig deep, you can find a lot of Ford insignia and and parts and Ford parts, and it's definitely a partsman special again to keep the price relatively low. Adams, my question for you is: all right, this guy bought this car for $65,000. It seems like a great deal. I worry a lot. I mean, I would not buy this or a Bentley because parts, if anything breaks down, are hugely expensive. Isn't that a big problem?
It is a big problem, Steve, and that's worthy of bringing up. And I do believe that is the depression currently of the price cycle. But that happens with a lot of cars that have these horrific reputations when new or next to new. Then they fall into the hands of the people who really can only afford the purchase price, but not the upkeep price. Then they get depressed in price, and then that cycle sort of catches up with itself, where people go, "Hey, that was a cool car," and they start to build back up. We don't know if that'll happen with the Aston. I seem to think it will, just because it is so dang good looking, and we all like the way it looks and sounds. And yeah, it's got a little bit of cheesiness on the interior. And I think the worst thing about them, by far, the worst. So if you're looking to buy one, do not get what they called the auto shift. The early single clutch. Oh my God, those were so bad. A lot of people took the F out of the word auto shift, and that's what it was. It was super clunky. super delayed. You would push on the gas and count to 1 or 2 and boom, then it'd be off. It was nothing good about that transmission. However, the 6-speed is a marvel. So a manual shift Aston V8 from 2010 on is a pretty dang good car and pick of the litter, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know what? That's why my Cobra, all the parts can come out of a Summit or Jegs catalog.
Amen.
So you can replace them?
Yes, exactly. The
Amen.
parts
Yeah.
are all
Okay.
out of Summit or Jegs.
That's
That's
thinking
easy.
ahead.
Yeah, go back to the picture of that car, the car initially. Obviously, the guy fixed it up. He got rid of the red, but there's the expression, you put lipstick on a pig. This is lipstick on a show horse.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that's a good phrase. That's right. Yeah.
I mean, just look at that. These around. So listeners, this is a white car with red around the front grille and then red up from the A pillar back to the C pillar. And that's it. It's kind of like, okay, here's some parts we can paint. Okay, let's paint them. Oh yeah, that might look good. No, it doesn't.
He was
Somebody
smart,
actually
you know?
thought that was a good idea.
Yeah,
They
well,
love to do that with Aston Martins, though. They really do. Look it up.
it was some attempt to commemorate their motorsports victory. I'm not sure what livery that pays attention to, but they had it in bright yellow. They had green with yellow, which helped me. Was that the John Cooper colors? I'm not sure, the green yellow. Somebody could tell me, but in any event, yeah, they did it with some sort of garish paint schemes and thought that was commemorative, but it fouled it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Safety.
All right, safety. Let me switch gears here. All right, so I want to do a little follow-up safety. Listeners, if you listen to the last podcast, we talked about Wyoming and their death rate in motor vehicles, and we talked about collisions with animals. And Steve-O sent me an article out of the Billings Gazette from August 27th. This is kind of a follow-up to last 2 weeks ago, I think, or maybe a week ago. But in 2020, State Farm Insurance did a report, and we talked about Wyoming, but West Virginia being number one, but Montana has the second highest number of wildlife collisions in the entire nation. And here's what's kind of crazy is they calculated that from 2008 to 2017, the annual cost in Montana of vehicle collisions with moose, deer, and elk was $87 million. So you think about that.
Almost 100 million.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly. But you can think about it. Well, from Montana thinks about it a little bit differently. They're thinking, well, yeah, this is a problem, $87 million worth of vehicle. But you know what? These animals that we kill on the roads represent 14% of the annual deer harvest and elk harvest. And by the way, the state makes $288 million in hunting revenue. So here's a weird twist on it. Yeah. So you think about it, it's only 14%, but no, their revenue is 288 million in revenue on hunting. And their collision costs are about 87. So you start to do the math, you're like, this is a real problem. So there actually is a thing called the Federal Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program. And Steve, I saw these with you in Iowa. I've seen them in Colorado. It's where over interstates and 4 lanes, they basically make a pathway across for the animals to learn. This is where you cross the road. And I'd never seen one before until I went out west. We don't have them in Alabama. But the Federal Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program has $350 million available. And of course, Montana was all over this. So they figured it out. They have a couple big places where animals cross the road, and the Bozeman did a big study, and they figured that if they could install a couple wildlife crossings, they would reduce the collisions by 85%. So they applied to get the grant money, and they did. But it's interesting, when you start to do the math here, we think about human cost, you think about car cost, 87 million. But here it really comes down to the bottom line on a huge state revenue. So a good follow-up article on that. And you think about it, the federal government has identified this as a major issue. So we're going to give some money, and it's typically 80% matching. The rest of 20% comes from the state. But in these states like this out west, you got people hauling ass down the road doing 80 miles an hour. You've had these elk, bison, deer that have been crossing the same place for millennia. We throw up a road. We think, oh, no, we're just going to throw up a road here. No big deal. Well, it is a big deal. and $87 million worth of damage. Big deal. So we can put in some crossings for the animals. And you know what? We don't kill people, fewer people die, fewer cars get trashed. And not only that, we're saving 14% of our wildlife revenue in terms of animals killed. So this is a great article, Steve-O, that you picked up. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, for us, Stefan, we think of, especially out west, it's a big pickup truck and it's going to run into a deer, whatever. And they actually, I remember when I lived in Texas, they called the grill guard. They used to call them Bambi bashers, which I thought was
Very, very Texas
very
of
inappropriate.
them.
But I talked to a man, this is several years ago, who's older, and he was talking about his kids, and he mentioned that he had a son who was about 35 years old who had recently passed away. And I said, "Oh, I'm very sorry." And he said, "Yeah, it was the most tragic thing. He hit a deer on his Harley Davidson. You hit something with your big truck, you're fine. Hit something with a motorcycle."
Let me tell you some interesting stories. I got two stories. One was a friend of mine, Jack Moody, in medical school. His sister was driving. I can't remember where she was driving, but she was in a Volvo 240. Remember the 240?
Brick.
I mean, basically a brick tank on wheel. She hit a cow at 55 miles an hour. And the cow came up over the hood, broke the front windshield, flew up in the air, hit the rear window. They came out unscathed. That's remarkable. And then, but as a trauma surgeon, I saw multiple patients that would hit a deer. They actually came through the windshield into the vehicle. And the most bizarre thing was the deer fur was actually stuck into them like little hypodermic needles.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah,
That's
from the point of impact, the force of impact, that the hair from the deer were stuck in them. And I
Isn't
saw
that called pressure fusing? I mean, that takes a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's a ton of pressure. You think about it, you hit an animal like that at 60 miles an hour that comes through your windshield. That's a lot of injury force. So I took care of a lot of people. I did take care of people on motorcycles that got hit, and they just never did well. But you think about you doing 60 miles an hour, now you're hitting a 200-pound animal. So you're going 60 to 0 with a 200-pound animal against you. It's like hitting a brick wall. So
yeah. Steph, you mentioned something interesting. You said, I think, and if I heard it right, and I jotted it down, so you may want to look back at your notes, 240 million in hunting revenue. And so
$288 million of hunting revenue.
Okay, so 288 million times the 14%, which are being slaughtered, that's a $40 million hole right there. Yeah. Not to mention what it's doing just to the automobiles and to the people, et cetera, and holding up traffic and law enforcement involved. And I'm not talking about the inconvenience because it's a horrific thing to happen, but that's $40 million just leaking away from the hunting revenue side of things. So this relates. How in the world does putting in a Animal Crossing reduce crashes by 85%? What do they do to corral these animals to go through some narrow pass? Do you know? Was that in the study?
Well, I know that I'm just going to speak off the cuff here because I haven't looked at it, but there's the Federal Wildlife Crossings pilot program has known that these animals typically have crossed the same paths forever.
Oh,
they follow rivers, trails,
it's their habit.
And then it's a habitat where they naturally follow from grazing in the summer to grazing in the winter. And then you go throw an interstate across there and don't think about it. Well, the animals are using the same pathway that they have for millennia. And it's kind of like in the Serengeti in Africa. The paths are very predictable, the animals. So when you put up these passageways now, these new interstates, they're incorporating the wildlife into consideration. And there is either over the top, it's typically underneath, but they build these, I've seen them out west. There's these big concrete walls and fences. So they funnel the animal wildlife so that they then go underneath the big 4-lane interstates.
Great move. Okay. Gotcha.
It makes total. I mean, yeah, it makes total. Be more at one with nature. It makes total sense.
Yeah, and sometimes and of course these overpass, it's not cement. They have dirt and growth, and it's wide. so the animals can do it. There's actually quite a bit of this out west, and it seems to work. Not enough to. I mean, it's still a lot of deaths of animals, but I think it's the more they do, the more it'll help.
Well, think about it. Across Montana, how many 4-lane interstates are there that cross the state of Montana? There's
Not
there's
many.
not that many. So, but the animals have been following the same migration paths for millennia.
All righty, well, moving on to hot hatches. As I said, this is going to be
Oh
something
yeah,
we're
I
going to
can't
really
wait.
get into. And automotive news again last week said that Volkswagen has announced that they are doing away soon with the
Oh,
manual GTI and the manual Golf R. They're going to be automatic only. This is just another step in kind of doing away with a hot hatch. Stefan, you're a hot hatch guy. Talk about it.
all right. So, listeners, it's kind of my origin story is my mom's French, so I spent a lot of time in Europe growing up as a kid. And the hot hatches started with the Golf GTI to the R5 Turbo to the Renault Clio, and hot hatches have always been the thing in Europe. Any young kid driving a car or older person, the hot hatches are where it's at. In America, we kind of had some hot hatches, and people kind of liked them. We had the GTI here, we had the Integra GSR, we've got the Hondas, but nothing quite like European. So for me, growing up as a kid, the hot hatches were just totally it. So I'm going to start with this first picture. My first car that I bought a 1983 Honda Accord, which you can see up here on the picture, two-door gray. It was not a hot hatch. It was a luxurious hatch. I got this instead of the GTI because this was my very first car that I actually paid for myself. I knew I was going to have to do maintenance, and I knew with the record of Honda that I would have basically zero maintenance costs on this car. I know, Steve, you had a Gen 1 GTI. And then later on, I moved to the 1993 Integra, which is another hot hatch. I had this color, but I did
Yours
not
that
have
fabulous color.
I had that color, but not in just as a GSR. I just had the simple GS.
Yeah.
So
It's a teal. If you can't see it, if you're listening, it's a
teal blue,
which is so 90s.
It is so nice, but it was the coolest
fabulous
color ever at the time.
Yeah.
And I had a beige interior. And this car, my Honda was fun to drive, but this Integra GS was it had the variable VTEC engine. Man, this thing, you could sling it into corners and it was just held the track. So,
you said, Stephan, I don't mean to interrupt again, but I mean, you were saying about the, this was not a hot hatch. Honestly, the cool thing about everything you're showing here and your origin story is they all had the DNA of the hot hatch.
Yeah, the DNA. So listeners, hot hatch is basically a two-door hatchback. So the cool thing is you can drive a two-door car. It's got two seats in the back, but then you can fold down the back seats, and you could not believe the amount of shit you could throw in the back of these things. So it was the perfect second car, because you could do so much with it. And in Europe, I mean, the hatchback still lives on now in 4 doors. But if you've never owned a hatchback, let me tell you what. What is it? The Audi A7 was actually a hatchback, or was it the A5?
A7.
A7. Let me tell you what. A hatchback is unbelievable. Just maximizes the capacity of the vehicle, how function. I literally bought a dresser and threw it in the back of my Honda Accord, two-door Accord. But to hatch up, the hatch didn't close, but I got the dresser in that we bought at an auction. So I've always been a huge fan of two-door coupes, and especially two-door hatchbacks. So
it's as you were talking, I mean, people don't remember, there was a time before the hot hatch, and now we're sort of entering this period that there could be a time after the hot hatch. Before it came out, people just thought about performance cars as these loud, booming, inefficient, gas guzzlery, could be finicky. There's maybe 2 seats. There's no luggage room. They're expensive to insure, expensive to keep, and boom, out pops the VW GTI, and people went, well, forget everything I just said. because they were all those things in the opposite. They were
Yep.
fuel efficient. They were easy to insure. They were easy to keep, easy to live with. You, like Steph said, you could put two people in the back, or you could fold the seats down and act like you had a two-seater, and you got tons of room. I
Yep.
mean, there was just it was like it was the only time we'd ever, or the first of the times we'd ever had a definition of something called practical performance, and they delivered.
Yeah, it's a great way to describe it. Practical. So it's totally practical. But if you wanted to sling in some corners, rev it out, max it out, and have a blast in a car that handled, this was it.
Yeah, another thing, I really like that description, Adams. This was practical, but it was also accessible. And I know you
Yes.
basically just said that, but one thing you didn't mention, which we all know, and I know Stefan knew this when he was driving his Accord. Back then, gas was expensive.
Yes.
These were fuel sippers, and they
Yep.
they didn't, they were cheap to insure, cheap to fill up with gas.
Yep.
All right. So let me start off with my.
Don't do favorites yet.
I'm not favorites yet. Okay. All right.
Not
Go ahead.
favorites yet, because I want to point something
Okay.
out. I'd said that these are dying, and I
Yes.
on the one hand,
Unfortunately.
I looked up what you can buy now as a hot hatch, and you can get a Mini Cooper S or John Cooper Works with a manual. That's a hot hatch. Obviously, the Corolla, the GR Corolla, which we've talked at ad nauseum, and then you can get the Hyundai Veloster N. You can get the Golf GTI and the R. You can get the Mazda 3 Turbo. Does that count? I don't know. But a
And
couple
what
things
about
that,
and the Honda Civic R? This is
Right.
4-door, but
I was going to make that point. It's no longer a hatch. I mean,
it's no longer a hatch. You're
it's
right.
a sedan
It's
shape,
a
and same with the
sedan. Yes,
WRX.
you're right. It's not fair. You're right.
WRX and the STI, they're sedans. So that's going away. So sometimes the body style has changed. But here's a list of what you can get in 2017, and just keep in mind what you can no longer get from this list: Ford Focus ST and RS,
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Fiesta ST, GTI and R. We talked about that. The Mini Cooper, same. Fiat 500 Abarth. That was a fun car. I drove that.
Yeah.
That was fun.
They sold like 12 of them. Yeah.
But still very cool.
I love them. I love to see them.
Not a paragon of reliability, but if you think about the list that I just what's for sale now, you can just tell these are all
It's
going
just
to go away.
sad. They're going away. Yeah.
So
now everybody wants the hot hatch SUV, the sporty SUV. Oh, give me a break, man.
yeah, it's you're
God.
really right, and there's a Explorer ST. Oh, give me a break.
Oh, give me a break.
There's a lot of stuff that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So let's go through our favorites. We all
All
listed 3 favorites, but Stefan, you're absolutely right. There's nothing else I can think of in recent years, which I mean since the 80s, where the French really led. This is one of those areas.
Yeah. Normally the French are running away from the fight, and I'm sorry, Mom.
I didn't mean that, but
apologize.
I didn't mean that.
I know.
Automotively, they
were remaining independent.
They did really well with this area, this sub niche of automotive, in a way
They
that
killed
they
it.
didn't.
They absolutely killed it.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to start here, listeners, with my number 1 favorite hot hatch of all time, and this is a Renault R5. So it's Renault, as you say in America, or R5. This is the Le car, but the R5 Turbo 2. So the reason I picked, I saw a Turbo 1, and they took the R5, they took the 4-cylinder engine out of the front, and then they threw it where the back seat was supposed to be, threw a monster turbocharger on it, and would rally this car. I saw a Turbo 1, the first generation, and it was just completely raw, kind of piecemeal together. By the time they came to the Turbo 2, they had actually kind of figured it out. And the reason I picked the Turbo 2 was I was in Toulouse, France, probably 1982. And it was about 2:00 in the morning. We were out partying at a local discotheque, and my buddy knew the owner, and she had the Turbo 2, and it was outside. He said, "Can we have the keys to it?" We actually went out at 2 a.m. She said, "You can't drive it, but you can start it." We sat in this car and started up and revved it. And it's forever in my mind, the sound of this car. So this is penned by Mark Deshaw and Marcello Gandini at Bertoni. Adams, which, yep.
Well, oh no, my
yes,
ears perked up. I did not know that.
Yes, the front and rear fenders. This is 160 horsepower, one out of 1.4 liter turbocharged. Now, as we say in French, mailed, this thing will throw your ass into a ditch so fast. It's like we think of the 930 as a Widowmaker. This R5, you floor it and you think you're doing great. Then all of a sudden that turbo kicks in. Next thing you know, you're doing 180 degrees and you're into the ditch. The other thing that's so cool about the Turbo 2, Fatima Blush in 1983 James Bond film Never Say Never Again drove this car. They typically sell for about $150K now on Bring a Trailer. But for me, of all the hot hatches, I've got 3 picked. This is I'm going out with a big bang. This is my very, very favorite hot hatch of all time.
That's a cool one. And Steph, I know you were intimating at this, with the rear engine and the whole Widowmaker thing. Of course, it went from the front wheel drive to.
Yes, the car went from front wheel drive to rear wheel drive, front engine to mid engine.
That's a tweak.
That's
yeah.
That is a tweak. That's a mild redo.
Yes.
Look at that thing, though. It looks like it's about 2 feet wider in the rear, starting at the back of the rear door, and that to me just looks fantastic.
It's like when you see an Audi RS with the blown out fenders, you see a 190 Evo, but for those kind of work. But when you do that, where you just blow out the rear fenders on a 2-door hatchback, this thing just screams menacing badassery, and I'm going to eat you up. And I mean, this to me is this is the finest iteration ever of the 2-door hot hatch. It doesn't get better than this. Now, it may get better technically in terms of driving experience, but in terms of looks and what a hot hatch is, this just describes it for me. This is it.
Good pick.
I think it's a great pick, Stephan. When it comes to the look, I totally agree. This car is the Key and Peele substitute teacher bit where he goes, "I'm for real." This car is for real.
So you think a 300E a 300C may have attitude? No. This is attitude defined in a car. It's menacing. I love it.
All right, Adams.
Yes, sir. I tell you what, I've got a very similar first pick because it is the Renault Clio.
Hey, it happens to be my pick number 2. Okay, all right.
Well, I tell you what,
I'm with you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let maybe.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead. This is my number 2 pick. I'm glad to think that good. We think alike. Go ahead.
We can partner because I sent you something in your email that as my alternate pick, but this particular thing sort of followed the exact same flavor that Steph just mentioned, where they took this pretty dang good looking little smaller car that they said, and what I read, and Steph, you may have already known this, but there was an engineer at Renault, this guy named Axel Bruin. What a great first name for a guy in the car business. And he was a crazy engineer. And he said, I want to take our V6 and I want to put it in the middle of one of these cars, but I have to find a car that's got the same wheelbase as the Twingo. That's what this was based on, which sounds to me like a store-bought dessert cake. And he's looking at cars with the same wheelbase, and the identical wheelbase of this car is shared by a Ferrari 308. So
I did not know that.
He was going to find a burned up or a wrecked 308. He was going to strip the body off, put the Twingo body on it, and create this car. And when he mentioned it to people, they went, "You're onto something, buddy." So they allowed him the engineering green light to look at that thing. It just looks, everything you just said about the R5 would apply to this. And I think it just looks a little bit more modern, a little bit more finished. And it's got the V6, and it's like 254 horsepower at 7,200 RPM.
So Adams, the Renault 5 that Stephan mentioned, which was awesome, that was early to mid 80s. What years is the Clio?
2001 to 2005. Yep.
Yeah,
01 to 05. And you really there were two. So there's the phase 1 and the phase 2. The first phase 1 Clio V6 was built by TWR, which is Walkinshaw Racing. And then they brought it back to Alpine in Dieppe, France, which is not far from where my mother grew up. And I've been to Dieppe a lot. And my first cousin's husband actually worked for Alpine.
And that's Alpine, not
Frederico.
Alpina. So they make
that's Alpine.
yeah.
And that was the phase 2. And the phase 2 came in with 255 horsepower V6, 0 to 60 in 6.4, which at the time was incredibly fast. And you're right. So this is like they took the R5. To me, the R5 is kind of like the quintessential. It's kind of like a Deschavaux, a French DS. That was one of the iconic shapes of cars. But you're right. The Clio was basically once again by Renault taking the R5 idea of the turbo into the Clio and the more modern version, and it was just every bit as just complete awesomeness, nastiness. And I'm going to pull up a picture here of the engine, and actually, just it was they completely polished the whole idea in the Clio. And there's a picture of the engine.
And and you know what's crazy about that photo is it's so weird looking at that motor, and then in the background are the back of the front seat.
Front seats. Yes. Yes.
You don't expect that.
Yes. So what's so cool is you would look through the side window of the Clio, and you can see the motor, just like a Ferrari. That's so cool. I mean, it's just, So Renault has really done some cool things. The R5 turbo and the Clio. So yeah, 2 amazing hot hatches. And Adam, that was my number 2 along with you.
That's a great pick, guys. Yeah, the Renault 5 Turbo is a blunt instrument. This had some sophistication. The Clio had some sophistication.
Yes.
But what a car. Okay. My choice, my first choice is, it's not my number 1 choice, but the first one I want to talk about is kind of sophisticated, but it was cool in a way that neither one of those cars were just nasty. Both of them.
They're like Dodge.
1978 Saab 99 Turbo. And I love the wheels, number 1.
Is that it?
Yep.
And I like this more than the 900 because it's smaller and lighter. Everything from basically the A-pillar back is shared with the 900, but the 99 had a shorter front end and was just not as expensive and less sophisticated. But it was their first foray into turbo. And I just love it. I thought it was nothing but great, so cool. Not nearly the performer of either one of the cars you guys mentioned, but I love it.
I do. I have to agree, Steve. I love the Saabs. They were so distinct, particular design, based off their fighter jets with the windshield, and they had their own peculiarities. But I have to agree for a hot hatch. This is kind of big for a hot hatch, but the Saab, very great pick.
I agree, and you don't have to look at that car too long to know that it's got some serious aero going on. And as Steph mentioned, the aeronautic background, those wheels, I'd almost forgotten those wheels. Will those wheels also make julienne fries out of a potato? Is that some sort of Cuisinart going on?
Can you imagine cleaning those wheels? Those listeners, this thing has got more veins on it than, veins being like wind vanes or like in a turret. You know what it really looks? It probably is. Looks like the veins on the front of a jet turbine engine. That's what they're designed after. No doubt, being a Saab, it has to be what they're designed after. It looks like the front veins on a turbo engine and an air jet.
It really does. It really does. And it's got a lot of them. They would be difficult to clean. But if you look at the year on that thing in 1978, and Porsche sort of popularized the word turbo in the households in 1976. So Saab was clearly already at work in this. They knew, turbos having come from the aircraft background. This was a sort of a landmark car to make a Spanish kind of car. That thing was, and it was fast. It wasn't as fast as maybe what we said, but this car was quicker than everything it competed against.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Stephan.
All right. I've already done 2 of mine because Adam took my second one. So which car's next? I guess Adam's.
Adam's do it. Yeah, Adam's do your next one.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, I'll jump in there with a bit more normal of a car, if we can call any of these normal. The Corrado, VW Corrado VR6.
Oh, wow.
All right. So let me. Oh man, let me.
That's
I gotta.
cool.
I
It
gotta
would be in
find a
that
picture.
email. It
Yes.
should say number 2, but
Okay.
this particular car, now we mentioned Corrados before, and it was a follow-up to the Scirocco, which was a a commercial success, but it was never a big performer. It looked cool. Well, with the Corrado VR6, they kind of changed that, and they took this narrow angle, I think it's 5 or 10 degree, very narrow angle V6. And there you go. And this one was, this is a very used example that was on a Bring a Trailer. And I'm glad you're showing that first picture first. Like, scroll back up. Look at how that front end has like
That is so
0
cool.
protrusions.
It's got a blacked out grill. That is so cool.
I like it. I
Oh,
like
I love
it.
it. I love it.
And it's got that low frontal area for good aero, and it kind of widens out and widens out. And they did this for a rather inexpensive little hot hatch. And there you go. I don't know. I really like that car. It was 190 horse version of the V6. They sound very good. It had a 0 to 60 of 6.4, which was healthy at the time, 145.
Yeah, that's very respectable.
And it got 28.5 miles a gallon.
Yeah.
So it's a car you could live with. Recaro seats, and it's very difficult to tell from that picture, but they've got this like thin red needle stripe and a thin blue needle stripe in that pattern of the seat, which looks straight gray. But anyway, a fabulous little car.
Great pick. I've always loved the Scirocco than the Corrado. They were very cool when I was in college. I mean, the GTIs were cool, but the Scirocco and the Corrado GTIs were like they just took it up to a different level. And it was especially the design. Do you know who designed this car? Were the Italians involved at all in the design of this, or is this?
I'm gonna say Giugiaro.
Giugiaro. I think it was Giugiaro. Yeah, I think Giugiaro did the Scirocco and the Corrado.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
great pick.
The thing I remember about this, and I certainly like this car, the interior picture of what you're showing is so 90s. I mean, it's so 90s.
But it's perfect. It's a perfect interior, though.
No, I agree. But the thing I remember was that the real hatches, the real hot hatches, from the 80s, the GTI, there was an Escort GT, which counts the Saab. They were all 4-cylinder. And I remember like, whoa, a 6-cylinder. The Scirocco, right. They were all 4 cylinders. This was the first one. And we're like, whoa, 6 cylinders.
Yeah. It was a narrow angle VR6 too. What's it, 15 degree angle? I can't remember.
That's what I was trying to remember, Stephan.
I think it's 15
probably
degree.
Right.
I think it's 15 degree V6 on this. Super tight. Yep. Very
it's
cool. Great.
It's such a narrow angle. You wonder why they didn't just make it a straight 6, but I'm sure they had a reason.
Packaging.
Yeah, yes. I guess you're right. Yeah. So my second pick is I was so bummed out when my favorite hot hatch went to sedan, and that is favorite for now, that's available now, the 2009 Subaru WRX STI hatchback. And you can't get a hatchback anymore. And it looked great as a hatchback. And everything you said, Stephan, earlier, the utility of opening the hatch and putting all your stuff in, people who own these cars are generally young, and you don't have another car, you don't have an SUV in the garage. You and your friends, or you and your girlfriend, or you and your young wife. Having a hatch is so great, and Subaru had it. And if you show a picture,
I'm trying to find it. Find it.
But it was so great. And now they did away with the hatch. I don't know, 2011, 12, 13, something like that. There it is. And then
that's good looking, man.
I know now it's only a sedan. It bums me out.
Yep. And Steve, isn't that some special edition with the gold wheels? And is that the crazy expensive one, or have I got those confused?
No, you could just get this standard. They did have some special editions that, of course, the gold wheels and the special Subaru blue harkens back to Colin McRae and the rally days. The reason they call it WRX was they couldn't call it WRC because that's trademarked. It's the World Rally whatever. So they call it WRX to kind of hint that, hey, we race in WRC. I'll say this: I've driven this car a number of times. Here's what I did. Here's what I said in my latest review of this thing. it has so much turbo lag. You wait and you wait, and at like 5,000 R, you're like, holy shit. This thing talk about it is unsophisticated and raw. I said, in a world of Roger Federers, this is a John McEnroe. And that's what it feels like. It comes in like, hey, all your sophistication, I don't care. I'm loud, I'm nasty, I got turbo lag. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Well, we have another dupe here because that was a pick of mine, and I don't. So obviously, I agree with every single thing you're saying. The one hit on this car, which may not make a grain of difference to either you or anybody looking to buy one. They may think it's cool. The exhaust note is just so pitiful, but you forgive that when you've got 254 horsepower, a very, very wonderful and well-developed four-wheel drive. I mean, Subaru is no stranger to how to make a four-wheel drive car work. And, that's a great car. And did we see the front of that thing? Did we see the crazy hood scoop on that car?
I didn't enclose a picture.
I didn't enclose a
That's
picture.
okay. It's in mine, and I know the picture is going to get jumbled up, but
all right, it's in
the
yours.
hood scoop, it's just an aggressive looking hood scoop, and it's just, I don't know, that's a great pick. So I had to throw in an alternate stuff, and it's sitting in your email, but
okay.
That's okay.
Well, here, while we're doing it, let's do this. While we're doing, I got my pictures up here. Let me go back here. Technological. We got to. I saw this picture here with this. Who is this stud here in this picture in front of a Gen 1 GTI? Let's talk about this car.
Let's talk about
listeners. Here's a red GTI with this total stud looking somewhere up in New York State. Lenny gets his car. He's got glasses. Might that be Steve Schutz and some Stan Smiths? I don't know.
This is by 1984 Volkswagen GTI, red on red. And this would have been 1986, 87. It's an apartment in Albany, New York. And I had two roommates, and we'd frequently go to the grocery store together in this car. And all the space behind the seats with the hatch, we put all our groceries there. So yeah, that's my top pick because it's so much fun. It's the original. And the original one was European only. And I think it was 1976. It came out Euro only. It sparked the blaze that was a 40 to 50 year, I guess a 50-year fire of hot hatches, which is now coming to an end. But everything we were talking about earlier, and I wanted it, and it came out in 80. It was only the Gen 1 was only available 83, 84. I bought it in 84. Absolutely loved everything about that car. By the way, 0 to 60 was, I think, 9.6 seconds.
But that was the era that, I don't know, we were all sort of like getting over the British sports car hangover where 0 to 60 times were in the 10 to 12 second range. And then the 240Z showed the world what it was about. This car, when it came out as a little four-cylinder, I mean, what did you say, sub 10 seconds? That was like moving.
Yeah. I just remember it was nothing but fun around corners. Everything Stephan was talking about around corners, stuff like that. It was nimble. It was so much fun.
Well, dude, I just got to say that, I also did pick a Golf for one of my favorite hot hatches. And here you can see is the Golf that I picked.
I know what that is.
Yeah. So listeners, I just posted a picture of a Golf, but it really isn't a Golf. This is the.
Yeah, I know what that is.
Do you recognize it? Do you recognize it, Adams?
Wait, it's water and it's got a 928S motor hammered in. Is that the one?
This is the German automotive inventor Gunther Artz, who he did the coolest cars ever. But this is a Mark I Volkswagen Golf built around a Porsche 928 chassis.
Oh, you can see the wheels.
Yes.
Bone dial
Look at
wheels.
that.
That's unreal. I hadn't seen that car in 15 years.
So I remember this because Steve-O, was it Car and Driver, Road and Track that first did the article in the U.S.?
Road and Track.
Road and Track. I read that. I'm like, oh my God, this guy had a dealership in Hanover, and he was constantly dabbling in customizing and modifying cars. But the one he's most famous for is he did the Nordstadt Carrera Beetle. created from a Volkswagen 1303 body, the chassis of a Porsche 914-6, and the 2.7 liter engine from a Porsche 911. And I've got a picture of it. I've got a
Porsche should have hired him. That's just like the photo. If you can't see the photo, you can't believe how good a Golf looks widened.
Yes.
It's just wonderful.
Yep. So I'm going to pull it up here. Just give me a minute. I'm doing too much stuff. I got to close this one.
That's
here it is. So here's a side view. Look at that. It's just perfect. And there's the front view. But here's the Nordstadt Beetle, his most famous creation. You think about that, a Beetle on a 914 with a 911 engine.
Those look like crazy? 935 BBS wheels.
Yes. So that's my top pick for hot hatch. The ultimate.
The hottest.
I know it's not quite. It's a one-off. I know, but I think that car was so famous. I had to bring up this podcast because that car cannot go away in history. People have to know about that car. It was so famous for its time.
Can I pick Steve? You got a third one in there?
Nope.
You already did it. Okay.
Yep. Well, all right. So,
Steph, look in your emails. I have to pay special respect to a car that we were saying that the GTI Volkswagen was the one that sort of set the tone.
Yeah.
Steph, if you'll look in your emails, you'll see one that says my new pick.
Oh, my new pick. Okay, let's see. I've got original hot hatch. My pick.
That one.
Okay, let me open that. Okay. All right. Oh, yes. Stop share. Let me do screen share.
This will be a surprise.
Yeah, I know what this is.
No, you're right, dude. This is it. This is a great one.
What
is that? It?
Yes, sir. The MGB GT. Which I thought was so handsomely done from the convertible. You know, that they made the windscreen higher, the side windows and pillars higher. They just really made a handsome little MGB/GT. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So listeners think about the MGB as a convertible. This is the hardtop version where the hardtop actually goes to the back.
And a real live hatchback. And I had several of these in a row in college. They were my favorite car by far, but this particular one, a guy named Ken Costello in England decided he would take the 3.5, what we know is the Rover V8, but in truth, it was a Buick Oldsmobile Pontiac aluminum V8, 3.5 liter, probably a whole 160 horse or something at the time. That Buick Olds Pontiac decided, we don't want that stupid thing. Nobody cares about aluminum. They licensed it to the UK, and of course, it went in Rovers and
I thought this was always a V6 car. I did not know it was an 8-cylinder.
It's a small V8.
Holy shit, I did not know that.
With crazy twin Stromberg carburetor sort of slam down on it, which may have been the worst thing about it. I had a Triumph TR8 in college as well, and it just had a great sound. And to me, that might be the original hot hatch, because they did make them. They did not export them to the US. And probably between 67 and 72 were the years. And they raced the living heck out of those things, and they were decently competitive. But there you go. That's my pick. And there's another photo in that email right above it.
Yeah, about that one right there. Yep. And those are only got 2 picks in there.
Well, that is a great pick. We are out of time, but no conversation about how hot hatches is complete without arguably the greatest of them all, and that is the Peugeot 205 GTI from the 80s.
Yes.
None of us. I didn't pick it because I figured you'd pick it, Stephan, because it's French. But
I already had 2 French. I had 2 French cars. I couldn't. I wanted to pick the 205 GTI, which is probably, you're right, it's the greatest hot hatch. It's attainable that you can still get. It really.
There wasn't some crazy one-off thing,
but it wasn't. But the R5 Turbo and the Clio V6 were so outrageous hot hatch. I had to pick that, and I would have gone number 3 with the 205, but I couldn't go 3 out of 3 for French. I had to bring in the Golf 928 because it was.
Well, I didn't pick it because I was afraid it would leak oil on my laptop.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I knew that was going to be fun, and it was.
Oh, it was a blast.
So we're out of time. Hope you enjoyed it, listeners, and Stefan closes out.
Hey, so listeners, please like, listen, subscribe, leave comments, tell your friends, and we want to keep this podcast going, but we can't do so without your support. Listen to us next week.